All right, guys. Narcissism is an epidemic in the modern world, especially in the United States, apparently. Boomers, it is said, 40% of them have narcissistic traits. Narcissism is an incredibly complicated, difficult to define, and supposedly impossible to treat disease of the mind that causes tremendous damage, unfortunately, mostly to the people around the narc. Not so much, well, the narc is destroyed. They're very miserable creatures in general, I think. So basically what happened is that I figured out that my mother had NPD shortly before she died. And it happened because I ended up dating a girl that was the most severe case that I have ever encountered, unfortunately. And that led to my ability to recognize it in my mother. And so recently I stumbled across a couple of different communities online of people that had suffered abuse from narc parents. And the stories were so similar to my own that it was shocking. It's still shocking. I'm still doing it, watching these videos and interacting with these people. And it occurred to me that sharing my story and offering what I've been able to do to sort of, you can't really overcome it, but I guess you could say to improve, to heal your damaged self-esteem mostly, because that's the primary aspect of our being that is shredded by the narc parent. So here, let me check in with the chat, make sure that we're all right. So yeah, it's difficult to figure out where to start with this because it's just such a massive, convoluted subject. But I guess telling my own story is probably helpful. Mostly because I hope that if there's anyone that watches this that is going through this and doesn't realize it or doesn't understand the significance and the necessity to address this and get the narc out of your life, even if it's your own parent, it is absolutely essential. You have to recognize it, and then you have to recognize how it has affected your perception of yourself so that you can sort of go through your being and realize it's not you. These things aren't even real, these perceptions, So, there are different types of narcissists, right? There's the grandiose narcissist, and then there's the self-loathing narcissist. And the self-loathing narcissist basically wants to be a martyr. They will provoke people into victimizing them so that then they can become the bad guy. In the case of the narc mother, they're often the devouring mother, and they want to destroy you so that you are codependent with them forever. And that was my mom to a very, very high degree. Another thing that makes this difficult, because it's often our parents that we're trying to come to terms with in this regard. You want to love your parents. You want to forgive them. You want to take responsibility for yourself as well. You should. So I've noticed, I work with plant medicine and I counsel a lot of people, and there's so many of them have narc parents. I see this a lot where there's a reticence to recognize the issue because they don't want to experience the rage at their parents. We are judged. If someone thinks you hate your mother, they're going to think that you're a lowlife. We have this cultural stigma around it that you just have to love and honor and respect your parents. And before I get into this, I want to make sure that I make it clear that I'm not saying that we should hate them. I'm not saying that, you have to blame and resent them. But you do have to find the objectivity to be able to analyze it and understand it enough to free yourself from it. You know, it's a difficult process. It's still hard for me, you know, to try to come to terms with these things and to realize what was done to me, the cost of it. It's not, and you know, even just sitting here trying to talk about this is kind of difficult. Usually, I don't have any trouble with streams, but this one I can tell, you know, I kind of have butterflies in my stomach and my mind's not really clicking quite like it should because I have to go through all this stuff. And it's not really easy to do. So I guess, yeah, the story, that's the easiest thing to do. And it's not all my mom, you know, I was really unlucky. My father was not my biological father, and he was basically a loser. You know, he alcohol, drugs, violence, the whole thing. But he had this thing where he would get drunk and tell me that there was a curse on his name. I wasn't his biological son, so the only way he could tie it to me was to say that it was a curse on our name from Freemasons on the Isle of Man, you know. And at any rate, he said that we were doomed to failure. You know, I would hear this all the time. There's a curse on our name. We're all doomed to failure forever. So to my mom's credit, it's not entirely her. But when I was very young, you know, these things are progressive, right? And this is another thing that complicates it for us. When I was a toddler, my mom was sweet and loving, and she was like a little hippie. And, you know, it's like once I hit a certain age, that all stopped. And she was constantly angry, constantly miserable. If you approached her just to talk to her, she would be like, what? You know? Just absolutely no love, no affection. And I think as a little child, I realized that I needed to put up a firewall between me and my mother. Like I remember the day that she tried to kiss me or hug me or something, and I wouldn't let her, you know, and I was a toddler. You know, something instinctively told me that you have to keep this woman at a distance. And so, and I'm sorry this isn't as focused as it could be. It's difficult for me to push through here. But, you know, so growing up, getting older, looking back, I realized the self-esteem problems were massive from the beginning, right? By junior high school, I remember having this belief that I was ugly and that, you know, no girls would be interested in me. And no matter how many times I set my eyes on in junior high, literally the hottest girl in the whole entire school, and then I found out she actually liked me. This happened over and over again over the years, right? It was not enough for me to even suggest to myself, maybe this perception of yourself that you have is not accurate. Like, how do you explain the girlfriends, you know? Imposter syndrome, right? I started to play guitar. No matter how good I got, everything I played was garbage, you know? And that persisted to the extent that even after getting recognition from like my biggest hero, you know, biggest possible hero, it basically just took him down off of his pedestal and made him a normal person, and I assumed he was just being nice, you know, if he said something kind to me. But I'm going to give you guys now actually the most extreme expression of this, you know, just to really paint a picture of like how severe the self-esteem damage is and how difficult it is to overcome it. You know, despite whatever evidence came my way, I could not override this self-esteem damage, right? So when I left Virginia at 21, I basically told my mom, I'm going out to California, and I'm at least going to manage to play with musicians that are connected to the Grateful Dead. At least the supporting musicians, you know, in the post-Garcia project, because I knew it was a little bit too ambitious to say I'm going to go get into the, you know, Grateful Dead and replace Jerry Garcia or whatever. That's kind of what was in the back of my mind. But that's what I told her. And I said, it's consciousness plays more of a role in creating our reality than most people realize or accept. And I'm going to prove it by going out and doing this thing. And so I go out there and I do that. Right. And I didn't talk to my mom for 8 years. Right. So I came down to Ecuador to visit her, and I brought a CD, right? I'm like 31 at this point. And I brought a CD of me playing with people from Rat Dog, Bob Weir's band, the original drummer from Primus, and he's now in Dead and Company playing at the Sphere in Vegas with those guys. And I played it for her. And she just kind of turned red, like she looked embarrassed or something. And she didn't say, that's amazing. I can't believe you actually pulled this off. You're not nuts after all. Like, after years and years of painting me as this like crazy person, I would find posts on the internet with my full name and stuff. With all the, She looked embarrassed. Like I had embarrassed her by pulling off this insane thing. And I realized later that, let's get through this. So in the course of being there in Ecuador, I went out to the jungle and drank ayahuasca. And as I was leaving, the shaman, who was extremely intuitive, obviously, said, when you get back to your mom's place, go directly to the yurt and say everything you need to say to her to the smoke. Do not let her intercept you. She intercepted me. We had a huge, huge fight. She provoked. They want to be victimized. You know what I mean? That just everything she could possibly do to try to provoke me. And she succeeded, ultimately. And now we have to rewind a little bit. When I was growing up, she was a single mom. We were dirt poor, right? So she would basically imply that she had to unalive herself starting when I was maybe 5 because she couldn't stand the burden of having 2 kids as a single mom. And so I was a smart enough kid, and actually this kind of ties into the story. I was a really smart kid, like prodigy smart. I was reading on an 11th grade level in 2nd grade. They brought in a specialist to like test me and taken out of normal classes, put in gifted and talented. And that's a whole nother story regarding the self-esteem thing, because regardless of all of this evidence that I was very intelligent, I was convinced I was an idiot because my mom had been gaslighting me since I was a toddler. But that's, just another subsection of this drama. But yeah, so she would basically imply that she had to unalive herself because she couldn't stand the burden of having children. So my first unaliving attempt was in 5th grade with a pair of scissors. I was trying to cut through my wrists because she had been talking about how, she had to unalive herself because she couldn't take it anymore and all this stuff. So she had been putting this on me my entire life, right? And after this fight where she provoked, and she was already planning it, so provoking the fight, and I really hope you guys that might be dealing with narcissists can understand this, because it was deliberate. Like, you have to get that through your head. She did this to me on purpose, right? She did this to me on purpose. She provoked that response and then unalived herself. My stepfather blamed me because he did not understand her narcissism and had no idea what I had been through. The community blamed me, right? And I realized, because I was on the cusp of my dreams when she did this. I've told the story in other videos, so I'm not going to get into it right now. But I pulled off this extraordinary, impossible thing, and exactly the way that I said I was going to. And I only realized this 2 nights ago, that I stopped caring about it because I was doing it to prove something to my mother, and I didn't know that. So first of all, when I brought her proof that I had done the thing that I told her when I was leaving, you know, I'm going to prove this to you, and she just didn't care. And then she unalives herself in a way that kind of like all my life, I'm eventually going to unalive myself, and it's because of you. It's because of you. It's because of you. Because of you. Because of you. Because of you. Right? She blamed me for her broken marriages. I mean, on and on and on. I don't want to sit here and like whine about my mom all this time. The main reason I'm conveying all of this is just because, you know, I know the denial that you can have when you're dealing with a narcissist of that level. You know, it's your mother. Letting her do that to me, leaving that door open, like my brother stopped talking to her 5 years before I did or something, you know, because he knew what eventually would come down the pipes. And yeah, I mean, that's the main bullet point that I'm trying to communicate to people is it doesn't matter if it's your mother, it doesn't matter if it's your brother, your father, whoever it is, you have to have no contact. You cannot put them in a position to do to you what my mother did to me. If I could do my life over again, I would have run away. I did run away many times, but I would never have come back. You know, if there's anything I could have done differently, I would have run away no matter what it took and never gone back. And the cost of growing up with this woman for me, I ended up with borderline personality disorder, which led to violent jealousies and, you know, you cannot control your emotions, but you do have empathy and guilt. So it's like, you know, I would explode in these rages. Then I would feel like an absolute piece of trash afterwards. Luckily, borderline personality disorder is curable. By the way, it is a consequence of narcissistic abuse a lot of times. But it gets better in your late 20s, and it is treatable. You know, I don't have any residue of this. And haven't for a long time. I developed chronic fatigue syndrome and severe gastrointestinal issues that took a decade and a half away from me due to opioid addiction. I ended up in prison. It's truly extraordinary, you know, and it also complicates it because my mother was not necessarily all evil either. All of these people are also people. They can have empathy. They're not necessarily psychopaths, right? I've never known a narc that didn't love animals. My mother would pay people's rent, you know, in the community in Ecuador where they lived if something happened. Like, she could be very kind and compassionate, but I just had the misfortune of being her son and the primary target of her lunacy. Hola, what's going on? Yeah, and I almost want to apologize because I know this is not coming off the way I had it planned in my head over the last couple of days, and it's really shocked me how difficult it was. I've rescheduled this a couple of times, and honestly, 2 of the times I didn't have to. It was making me almost manic just thinking about it, you know, going through all of the old memories and realizing what had happened. So let me tell you guys a little bit about how I discovered that my mom had NPD. I ended up dating a girl whose entire family was a nest of narcissists. But I had no real experience with this other than my mother, you know. And I am an extremely logical person. I'm on the spectrum for sure. And, you know, I'm aware of what I do and why I do. You know, I'm very self-aware and like analytical and stuff. So it just doesn't make, it was really hard for me to understand how it was possible. It's like she was so crazy that I just didn't believe that it was possible. You know what I mean? Like it didn't seem like it could be real or something. And the first thing you'll notice, oftentimes they think everyone else is a narcissist. Her sister's a narcissist, her mom's a narcissist, dad's a narcissist, I'm a narcissist, everyone's a narcissist, right? Because they project. And what can be so maddening and difficult to understand is that when they project, they believe it, right? So she would do something to me, and then if I said something, she would start yelling at me as if I was the one that had done it to her. And for the longest time, I thought she was just being manipulative or not, you know, fair, and it took me a long time to really understand that she literally believed the things that she was saying. You know, they're just so convoluted in their minds, often as a result of trauma. And this is something that we should probably also get into. In my mom's case, she claims that she was SA'd very badly, and that her stepmother knew about it and turned a blind eye. So these trauma victims often develop the ability to engage selective memory kind of at will, right? So in both the case of this ex of mine and my mom, that's the mechanism that is allowing them to engage in these behaviors and actually believe in it. They're not exactly manipulating you. They're not exactly lying. They really believe whatever they want to think. That's one of the mechanisms that facilitates is almost a bad word for it, but they'll never take responsibility for anything either. That is another huge element of this. Man, my plan for this stream has just gone right out the window. Let's see, what the hell was I going to talk about? Oh, it does give you superpowers also. This is an interesting aspect of it that kind of surprised me. Apparently, people that have suffered from narcissistic abuse develop incredible pattern recognition skills. I have known this about myself for a long time. It is to the extent that it's like prophetical, you know, it's crazy. And I stumbled across a community of people that have the same thing, this pattern recognition ability that is to the degree that it's like almost supernatural. That really blew my mind. And it comes from hypervigilance, from the abuse. Because you have to constantly walk on eggshells, and you have to constantly be guarded, and you have to constantly be protecting yourself. And it's almost to the extent that it's a matter of survival, you know, that you do this. develop this hypervigilance. Which kind of brings me to, how do you get out of it? How do you get out of it? Psychedelics are tremendously helpful, but only in the right context. You have to have the ability, the knowledge, the tools to navigate that space in a very specific and directed way. And if not, then you need a guide. But that is one of the main things that has really helped me. But as I was saying in the beginning of the stream, the main thing is that you have to develop the attachment, detachment, and objectivity in regards to this parental figure or whoever the narc abuser is, to see how it has affected your perception of yourself. It's basically just psychoanalysis. You have to find a place of at least neutrality, if it can't be forgiveness. And you have to find the specific memories that inculcated these aberrations into your being. For example, when I was I've had more opportunities on levels that, never happened to anyone in my life than I care to think about, like crazy. But I was guaranteed to sabotage them, and that was one of the hardest things for me to get over. It's not just a matter of self-worth either. When you have had a narc parent, you have to realize they have been trying to destroy you. And if you're kind of rolling your eyes at that and thinking, well, that's a bit extreme, isn't it? It's not. It really isn't. These are not conscious efforts. These are subconscious aberrations manifesting as extreme toxicity. But they really are trying to destroy you. They're trying to make sure that you can never leave them, that you can never gain your full independence, that you will never exceed them. Like my father telling me that my name is cursed, so I'm doomed to failure no matter what, over and over again from the time I was a toddler. What do you think subconsciously was driving that? So as I said earlier, we were really, really poor. And one day I wanted ice cream. I think I was probably 4 or 5, and my mom didn't have enough money for ice cream. So she probably kind of blamed me for being poor, like it's my fault that she was dropped out of school in 7th grade and got pregnant at 17 by a 15-year-old. But when I asked for the ice cream, she screamed in my face, like neck veins bulging out, like blood red, like, "You don't deserve ice cream." And I think I got that response a number of times, So I think there was this mechanism installed, that I just couldn't have anything. And I think also, the prophecy of my father telling me that my last name was cursed, maybe that had some influence as well. But that's the example that I'm giving, that you have to pinpoint the earliest and most charged influence, and then connect that to your behaviors. And that's just opening the door, but it's a hell of a step, Cause and effect. And I can tell you that just the realization does help, because, for example, deserting my band at this, my whole life had been leading up to this moment, and I let my mother lure me to Ecuador and then, pull the rug out from under my feet in the worst possible imaginable way. Right. So I gave up on music, really. And this was my true will, right? I'm a true will guy. Like, what the hell's up with that, you know? And just realizing that I did that because I could no longer prove it to my mother. You know, I didn't know that was my motivation, but just realizing that in the last few days has drastically changed my attitude towards music. It's changed the way I sing, you know. And the thing is, all of this stuff is like intertwined, right? So when you free yourself from one aspect of the influence, other things are loosened as well, you know, all of the sort of correlative damage. So, for example, when I was a little kid, my mom used to always tell me not to sing. If I started singing, she would tell me it was too monotone and I didn't know how to sing and just stop. And, you know, she's a little kid, imagine. And so, you know, I've been a really uneven singer my entire life. Sometimes I sing really well. Sometimes it's just awful. And it's a repression from that. And I noticed that just this last revelation, it's almost like something in my throat has released, you know. I no longer feel constricted. I don't feel restrained, you know, like I'm afraid or something. It's crazy too to realize how much of it, you know, how much damage, because I have studied psychology and mysticism and, you know, taken psychedelics and all of this stuff for forever. And I made tremendous progress. You know, when I was younger, it was not looking like it was going to end up well for me. You know, I was dangerous. Just, you know, it was bad. So you can kind of develop a sense of complacency. Like, I've done it. I have escaped, you know, and I've realized over time that there's just so much and it's so deep that even at 46 years old, after contemplating this stuff and, you know, going after it with every tool available, there's still stuff that I haven't found yet emerging. I have seen narc parents drive their kids to unalive themselves. I have seen severe, well, is this psychological and like epilepsy? I don't know if it's a neurological, I guess. It's physical but neurological, so it's definitely not psychological. Yeah, let me check in with the chat and see if anybody's had made any suggestions. I am kind of annoyed that I've been so kind of unfocused, because I swear I've been thinking about this constantly for the last like 3 days. And I had a game plan, and then when I turned the camera on, it just all kind of fell apart. Okay, I don't really see any questions or comments there. By the way, you guys, do me a favor, hit the like button, share, subscribe, consider becoming a patron. We're demonetized. And so the only compensation we get for this is from the community, and we do appreciate it a lot. We also just opened our Etsy store. We have Bob and Sana paste drops and other things I don't want to say available there. And if you're a patron, after a while, you get discounts and whatnot. And so anyways, there's that. Let me mold this over for a second and see if there's any really crucial. I feel like I've really been all over the place, man. That the narc girl that I dated, you know, this is worth talking about actually, people have asked me, you know, like, why didn't you leave her sooner? She was still stalking me last year or the year before. I don't remember when the last time. Some of you guys have followed me long enough, you might remember this. I would block her profiles and she would make a new one, and the last one was called It's Me. Like, how creepy is that? It's me, you know? And she would go all over all of my socials and attack me. That's the worst things she could possibly think of to say. Like P3DO and, you know, just luckily she's so insane at this point that it was obvious to people that this, you know, they were like incoherent sentences, and I don't think it really did any damage. But 7 years, man, 7 years since I'd left the States, she was still stalking me after all those years. And I honestly didn't leave her sooner because I knew that I would not be safe. You know, and I can be a scary person. You know, I was an outlaw for most of my life and in dangerous places like Washington, D.C. and Northern California. You know, I was another problem with the the borderline personality. When I was violent, I grew up in a really bad neighborhood. So my mom took me to enroll in martial arts, and it just so happened that it was a guy named Master Kwan, Grandmaster Kwan, actually, and you guys should look him up and watch some videos. So that complicated things pretty severely. I did stop getting beat up in the neighborhood, though, that's for sure. Anyways, though, there is no limit to what the offended narc is capable of. You know, so being an outlaw still at that time, I knew that if I broke up with her, if I left, I needed to leave the state or the country, because she would do anything in her power to get me sent to prison, or, you know, to convince the outlaws. It's a self-regulating community, right? So there are certain things that you can tell the general population, and if they'll believe it, you know, so that's the answer to that question. Why didn't I go away sooner? I couldn't. Literally couldn't. It just wasn't worth it. You know, at one point I left her. And of course she could keep the house because she had a kid, and I was like sleeping in my van, and I brought her $600 so she could pay her rent, you know? And when I brought her the money, she said something like, "You're such a selfish piece of shit," or something, after she took the money, you know? That's pretty typical narc behavior. So one of the reasons that this stream is kind of a mess tonight, other than maybe the emotional and psychological toll that it's been taking on me thinking about it, is that I have a date with the missus tonight, and I was going to do this later, but I've also been trying to condense my spiel about this. Oh, I guess earlier I was started to talk about what can you do about it, and then I just kind of trailed off into you know, other stuff. Aside from the psychoanalysis, one thing I've learned, and this is really interesting, because the more I look at this, the more I understand that a lot of these influences actually are giving me some of the components that serve me the most in my life. So that's weird, you know, it's really weird. The perfect storm of being autistic and having a really high IQ and having narc abuse actually did something to my brain that I wouldn't trade for anything in the world, you know. And apparently the narc abuse was a significant part of it, because the pattern recognition thing is massive. So, you know, you can even, like I said in the beginning, you can't really get rid of it. You know, I'm never really going to fully overcome all the damage that was done. And worst of all, I'm not going to get all those years back. I'm not going to get those opportunities again, you know. There's nothing you can do about that. But one thing you can do is transmute the trauma, as this stream was titled, the wounds into wisdom, right? And leaning on the strengths that were derived from all of this is somehow satisfying. It's almost like victory over the abuser or something. It's like there's something in the transaction that almost justifies it all. And maybe it's just me, but there is something I can't really articulate that's helpful about that. It also probably is why I'm so good at my job. You know, the Terrence McKenna said the shaman is a madman who has healed himself. You know, and in the process of recovering my identity, I've had to do so much analysis, and my mother, I think her fractured being was so complex that navigating the labyrinth of all of this left me with an incredibly proficient, like intuitive, psychological, analytical toolkit, you know, crazy good at it. And then I think also when you learn how to lean into these things that you've developed as a consequence of these unfortunate experiences, it also gives you the tools you need to fix more of the damage. So it's like once you change the trajectory from self-loathing and self-sabotage and you know, the gaslighting, that's something I haven't really gotten into much. I keep almost saying her name, this ex of mine. I don't want to do that. But my mom as well, you know. If she didn't want to admit something, she would say, it must have been your other mother, right? I would hear that a lot. God, you weren't as abused as I was. That's one of the last things that she said to me. That's a great one, too. But yeah, she would just not remember. I don't remember that. Like she forced me into the military. I had to go AWOL. And then when I confronted her about it in Ecuador, she said, I don't remember that. And all kinds of stuff, you know, like she got drunk and she got a boob job and she's like, there's your college money, you know? And I mentioned that and she's like, I don't remember that. You know? So I've had all these experiences over the decades that defy belief, and that's part of the issue. But at a certain point, I started to wonder, like, why has it been so hard for me to accept these things that constitute my ontological model, I guess, you know? Why have I had so much doubt despite overwhelming evidence? You know, why isn't I couldn't believe in my own experiences even? And this is another thing that just hit me recently. I've been gaslighted by my mother since I was a toddler. I do believe I went off track and lost my train of thought again. That's the difficult part about this, because I think about this stuff and my mind just kind of goes blank, you know. So, again, you guys, you know, I mostly did this. I had planned to go, I think, a lot deeper into a lot of the stories and stuff to really flesh all this out. Maybe I'm just not as eager to dredge all that shit up as I thought I was. Um, but you know, the main reason I do what I do, this channel and working with the plant medicine and everything, it's because of all the wasted potential in my own life. You know, like it's almost unbearable to look back and realize not just what, but also why so many of these things. Just so much pointless suffering and wasted time and missed opportunities. And I do what I do mostly in the hopes that I might save somebody else that experience. Because it's an absolute nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare. And you know, you can't escape it. You can rise above it. And the reality is that the universe is constructed like this because opposites, you know, are needed to fuel each other. And people take issue with this idea, you know, that damage is necessary for genius and, you know, high level creativity. But show me an exception. Show me an exception. And so with the proper tact and attitude and education and strategy, all of this stuff can be used to fuel ascension. That's what it's there for, in truth. So I do regret, you know, a lot of the consequences of having a narc mother. And it has been getting me down for especially the last 5 years or so. I think thinking back, like getting older and like, damn man, this is probably not going to come around again, kind of thing, you know. But more recently, I've really been able to change how I view this stuff, and I've realized that the substance that I have now, the clarity that I have now, the wisdom that I have now, the ability that I have to help others and have insight, it wouldn't exist to the degree that it does without the trials and tribulations having been, you know, inversely correlated or whatever. And the most important thing, you know, to anyone that realizes that they have a narcissist in their life, no contact, it really is the only solution. I mean, I know of one case where one of the kids ended up unaliving himself, and the other one would pace when he was in his room. Like, people are in jail, they just walk in a circle like a caged coyote all day. This kid just never stopped, never stopped. Unless he was sleeping or engaged in some activity. You have to just get them away from you. I thought that I was being compassionate. My brother didn't come to my mother's funeral. I thought I was being compassionate. Like, it's just too cruel to just not speak to your own mother, I didn't know it, but I didn't have a choice. I didn't have a choice. And it's progressive, right? This disease. So the longer you wait, the worse the narc gets and the more dangerous the narc becomes. Check in with the chat. Zooming on a little bit here. Do you ever have lapses in your own memories from these traumatic events? I do not. I have intense continuity of I was trying to quote someone. I can't remember. Hold on. Let me read. Thoughts on regret. Pattern recognition is already a narcissistic trait. Yeah, well, that's why I said that, the combination of all of these things, I think it's why I ended up, it's not just that I have good pattern recognition. They're actually like IQ tests that are just for that, and I pretty much broke it. So, it's not normal. Like, it's not like a normal autistic pattern, you know what I mean? I go back and watch some of my older videos, and the predictions that I make and stuff, they're always right. And it's not because I'm a prophet or something. It's just, that's what I think anyways, that it's just the pattern recognition. And it's actually a really interesting subject that I we should get deeper into. But I think one of the things that's really baffled me about it for so long is the degree of specificity that often comes from this stuff. And if the holographic theory of the universe is correct, and everything's sort of like a fractal, it actually makes sense that if you can totally map even one piece of the fractal, you're able to extrapolate anything from it. So anyways, that's not the subject now. The thoughts on regret. Shit, man. It's a tough one, It's a really, really tough one, especially when you realize that, at least in my case, where the subconscious is exerting influence, when it's driven by trauma, there's not really anything you can do about that until it's all worked out, It's gonna happen. Like, I became aware of the self-sabotage and whatnot way before I was able to stop it, and it's a difficult thing for us to even understand that we have that automata, that these impulses or whatever can just exert themselves, and you're literally like a puppet in those moments, and you're not gonna see it with clarity until after the fact. So, one thing that kind of helps, I guess, is to realize that you're not at fault, which is different from not taking responsibility. You weren't at fault, but you still have to figure out how to correct it, And lately, one of the things I've been focusing on is that it's never too late. You never know what's going to happen. I mean, the number of times that I lost some crazy opportunity, like, I'll give you one example that is probably the worst. Like, the Grateful Dead are my biggest influence, and of them, Phil Lesh was the number one hero. So biggest hero influence alive. Garcia would have been number one, but he was dead. And I ended up not only, just meeting him would have been insane, but I ended up, and I did not do this on purpose. I just happened to be sitting at a table at his club, and his kids were playing. I didn't even know they were playing. I didn't know that it was their first show. I knew none of this shit. I just happened to be at a guitar lesson down the road, stopped into the club, And I'm sitting there, and Phil and Jill come in and sit down next to me. We're like elbow to elbow, and he's crying watching his kids play their first show. Later, I heard him say that it was a pinnacle experience of his life, and I was like, Jesus Christ, man! I was sitting with him for that. And afterwards, we had a long talk, and he was actually moved to tears and wanted to help me. And, I was talking about this self-esteem damage earlier, that even though I knew the Grateful Dead had these rules they followed religiously, one of them was you never blow smoke, right? So he wouldn't say anything insincere. They don't do that, And it's like, when he started to give me some praise, I guess would be a fair way to put it. It's almost like he lost his stature in that moment or something, and I also just assumed he was just being polite, even though I knew they don't do that, And he asked me to bring him music, and I just didn't. Which, if I could have gone back and told my 20-year-old self that when I left, Virginia to go out there to do exactly that, and then it just happens, and I didn't even do it on purpose, like that's just, it's fucked up it's so fucked up to think about. And he actually, the next time he saw me, he mentioned it again. Because, this club, I lived near it, and I would go and eat there a lot, and he was around all the time back then. Trying to get over something like that. And he just died, a couple of months ago. And that was like because I always kind of told myself, like, I'll make it up. I'll go back and drop something off. Maybe he'll remember still, or I don't know, whatever. And that was like, nope, that's definitely not a thing now. But the point is, I'm sorry, I kind of trailed off there. The point is that that's not the only thing on that level, really, that I've managed to do after thinking that, that's maybe the biggest one, but, things up there like that, more than one of them. And every time when I still had this self-sabotaging instinct, I would think there's no way I'm going to get another chance. And then I would. And it was on another level compared to the last one. So not only did I get another chance, but it was like, scaled up a lot. And that just continued to happen. In fact, it's even a thing at the moment. Something else, random, crazy shit like that has happened. That, it's not really clear whether it's anything or not, but it certainly could be, and it's definitely real. And it's even higher up on the totem pole than Lesh was. So it's like, you never know what's coming in the future, I guess, is the point, and miracles are not only real, but they're sort of the rule, if you don't allow yourself to be hypnotized by the mundane, right? Like, our culture is kind of engineered to make the ineffable, to reduce the ineffable to the level of mundane. Like, that's what science is for. This is like what humanity does to keep itself in its torpor. And if you are constantly aware that everything around you is constituted of miracles, they are present in macro, I think, much more than they otherwise would be. You ain't going to learn what you don't want to know. And I don't want to say you're not going to see it if you don't believe it, because that's not a good approach exactly. It's more of a matter of being open and not allowing yourself to be lulled into that sort of mundane stupor, really. I think that's the main reason that I still have, so many experiences that are just unbelievably like the Lesh thing and things like that. The reason that's happened to me so much is just my frame of mind. I never really lose connection with the mystery. I've never understood how people do that even. Like, you're a monkey on a rock, and I mean, you guys know what molecules are, and I mean, on and on and on. I mean, it's just incredibly impossible, and yet it's happened anyways. And if you wake up every day like that and don't have any fear, which is something I don't know where I got that from after the life that I've lived. I mean, I had fear in certain ways, but like I was not afraid to go try something that should be impossible and just do it anyways. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you have that attitude and that frame of mind, there's really no reason to look back. Incidentally, it also really helped me to get some surgeries done recently, because I didn't realize my intestines were like tangled up and stuff. I just thought I had a hernia. So I was feeling like I was 100 years old, and I thought, well, this is what it's like to be 46, because I didn't know what was going on. So that's helped me, but that's got nothing to do with this really. But yeah, I think it's part of the reason for my renewed zeal and positive expectations. But yeah, man, miracles are omnipresent and imminent. So if you're just receptive to that, there's no reason to look back. The thing with magic, right? Real magic, really every process in the universe, this is true of the transmutation of lead into gold, right? The Congress with a demon that the magicians talked about back in the day was really about transforming negative components of the psyche into positive ones, because you can't destroy the energy, you can only transform it, right? So, rather than regret, and this is easier said than done, and you have to look at it like, well, the next time when we scale that opportunity up, I'm going to be alert for this error, or aware of this necessity, cognizant of the parameters, to a degree that I wasn't last time. So it's not a loss, it's a accretion. So every step that you take expands your empire. It really truly is just a matter of perspective. This channel is Gute. What is Gute? Yeah, I appreciate all you guys for being here as well. It's been a crazy couple of months with the surgeries and all of the stuff, and this is interesting maybe. My stomach problems that I've had my whole life are definitely connected to the mother. And interestingly, the shaman that I was working with said that it was like the first time I really put it together. He just said I was out talking with spirit, and she told me that your stomach problems are because of your mother. And it's not like I had told him a bunch of stuff either. It was really, really wild stepping into that world in the early days. But anyways, the fact that all these things have become so clear in the last couple of weeks since the surgery, where my guts were put back into alignment, I don't think that's a coincidence. And to get a little bit metaphysical about this, I think management of like your gut biome. I've seen a bunch of, I didn't watch any of them, but I've seen thumbnails, science channels talking about like how there could be, no, not there could be, I think they proved this, that there's a byproduct, waste from some bacillus species or something, and that makes us age. It's like the primary thing responsible for aging, and all sorts of mind control, basically. Like these parasites that can make an ant cling to the top of the grass so the liver fluke can get in the cow's stomach, or liver, I mean, and even rabies. Think about that, a virus that makes animals bite other animals because that's how it gets transmitted. Like, that's crazy if you really think about it. And all of these things are manifestations of energy, So repairing this stuff and reorienting our disposition and changing our trajectory when it's necessary, the whole being approach is probably underrated. People overcome depression, they start exercising a little bit and whatnot, but I know that aside from plants, aside from exercise, all of these things, like really keeping up on like how to optimize your gut biome, watching all the new research as it emerges, and really optimizing every aspect of your being, colloidal gold in the brain, like your life is going to improve if you take colloidal gold. And if you figure out exactly what organisms you need in your gut biome, and get your brain chemistry straight, the potential for not only healing and transforming ourselves in this moment is tremendous. And I'm awfully suspicious that it's actually the reason why they are shaking the ant farm so violently. The Ubermensch could very easily emerge from everywhere all at once, any minute now. And I have a feeling there are some POSs in Washington and other places that are terrified that might happen. This whole thing about the boomer generation being 40% narcs, that's by design. It's by design. It's partly just a consequence of the vapid, purposeless culture that's been propagated, but that's been done for a reason. And if you really think about narcissism or any psychological maladaptation, it's basically just unawareness. The person's unaware. Like my mother, if she had known what she was doing to me, she would not have done it. If she could, if she had an awareness and could, you know what I mean? They just, the older generations, generally, this is evolution, they're not, I'm willing to bet if you actually tested like the ratio of subconscious to conscious governance, that the further you went, the average, would more subconscious and less conscious. And that's an absolute necessity if you want a subservient population. You can't have a bunch of illuminated, self-realized people running around. You can't bullshit them. You can't lie to them. Truth is, there are equations for truth. And once you know those equations, you're never really wrong about anything. So the potential in this moment is absolutely off the charts. And I wish all of you the best of luck in eradicating narcs from your sphere of influence. Finding the strength to be objective and do what you need to do, no matter how harsh it might seem. Do it now. Thank you guys so much. I got to eat some mushrooms tonight, and I'm hungry, so I'm out. But thank you so much for spending this time with me. It's unfortunate that I was a little bit discombobulated, but I guess it's the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. Thank you guys so much. Please hit the like button, share, subscribe, and consider becoming a patron. You can also make contributions to the channel via the stuff in the things in the description and the chat. We're demonetized, so we do appreciate your support. Also, we're still having events in July and after in the jungle. Possible small groups sooner. So if you're interested in those experiences in the Sacred Valley or the Amazon rainforest, shoot me an email and we can set up a voice call. Also,